As we come now to the end of our examination of Christian cultural heritage, I want to take some time to think about the greater implications of kind of where you go from this. It's one thing to think about all that we've looked at in the terms of understanding and intellectual knowledge. And so now you have a better understanding of how certain things came to be. You have a better understanding of certain aspects of the biblical narrative, perhaps. So there's all things that you can kind of say, okay, well, I have a better understanding. Or even thinking about application in the sense of, well, you know, I'm going to do this in my job, and I'm going to do this in my life. But I want to kind of close with, you know, or take some time to think about some broader implications of this. Perhaps none of us will be remembered in 100 years, for example. When we think about the way history moves and how often people are left out. Right? In thinking about history, of course, you know, and thinking about the voices of the past, so many people aren't heard from. They don't make a lasting impact in the historical record. So, for example, think of the thousands, millions of Jews that existed at the time of Jesus. Think of the thousands and millions of Christians that existed shortly after the time of Jesus. And yet, we only have a record of Jesus, the apostles, you know, some other important, prominent people at the time, but the common Jew, the common Christian, their lives are largely lost to us. And so any sort of reconstruction is archaeological excavation, etc. We don't know names of people. They haven't been remembered. And probably, you know, most of us are going to be the same kind of way. A generation 3, 4, 5 down the line, should the world continue, we might not even be remembered outside of our own families. We might not even be remembered in our families. So I don't say all that to say, you know, kind of a pessimistic, what's life worth? You know, obviously, as we've talked about in a variety of situations, life is very valuable. But in terms of greater impact on human civilization, we probably won't make those kind of contributions. And maybe some of us will, but probably most of us will not. And that's okay. Most people are like that. That doesn't mean, however, that our day-to-day lives don't have some great significance. I mean, obviously we are significant because God sent Christ to die for us, all of us, individually and collectively. So we have significance. But I don't want to kind of leave it in this mode of just saying, well, we just live in our, you know, tiny little sphere, do my job, maybe have a family, you know, maybe be involved in social organizations, of course, being involved in the local church, you know, those kind of things. And just think about kind of a day-to-day living aspect. Instead, I want us to think about, in this section, some greater significance to what we do and who we are. Now, when we started the class, it might appear that I'm changing trajectory here a little bit, but hold on and stay with me for a minute. When we started the class, I showed you a variety of pictures. Hopefully you remember this section. Right? And so we looked at a variety of these optical illusions to talk about how perception is played with. and how we can all be looking at the same kind of thing and see different types of aspects. And probably now you can see, okay, the old woman and the young woman, and how artists especially are very good at these kind of things and perspective and all these kind of things. And this is reflective of a larger aspect of human existence, right? That often as we look at the lives around us, as we think about certain things, we are shaped by certain perceptions. We see what we want to see, or we only start off seeing certain things, but perhaps we can see other things if we are willing to be open-minded. But then, of course, there are other things where we have to, in order to see them, put forth some effort, maybe dig a little bit, pay close attention to some things around us. We also talked about how culture impacts that it shapes how we think about certain things, whether we see a box on the woman's head or whether we see a window. And we shared this chart to reflect, excuse me, to reflect some of that distinction as we think about all the things that are going on around us and the reality that we encounter and how limited we really are in engaging the world around us because of physical limitations, because of the way our minds work and not our minds, but our brains work to filter certain information out. But then, of course, we also have cultural constructs, social constructs that shape how we approach those kind of things. All of this, of course, we talked about at the beginning of the course. So why bring it back up? Well, I bring it back up to transition to a more important aspect of our existence. You see, when we were talking about this at the beginning of the course, we focused predominantly on how so much of what we experience is shaped by culture and background, physical limitations, those kind of things. But we also talked at that point briefly, mentioning how much of what we consider real is shaped by our sense experiences. Now, as Christians, and thinking about the Christian worldview, we would probably all agree that there are realities beyond what we experience in our senses. We can't, for example, through our senses, experience God. Now, we can see God's effects through our senses, I believe. We can interpret certain events that we have sensed as the workings of God. But in most cases, we would say, well, God is not experienced through the senses, yet, as a Christian, I believe He exists. So, there is some reality to something beyond what I'm able to experience through what I'm able to see, touch, hear, taste and smell. But too often we live as if reality is what we can experience through the senses, even as Christians. We think so much about this world around us and what we can experience through the senses and sometimes give so little attention to what we would claim to believe also exists beyond the senses. That there is a spiritual world out there that we cannot see, we cannot touch, we cannot hear. Now, certainly people have claimed to, and really, you know, we would say that at some times there have been people who have experienced that in a sensory type of way, right? If we believe the Bible's true, we believe that God has spoken to certain people audibly. At some point, has appeared where people could see angels. But in general, there is this realm that most people have not experienced through the senses. And a lot of movies and television shows over the past couple decades have played with this concept to try and tell a narrative and talk about this larger issue of what is real. Whether that's The Matrix in the 20th century, Inception in the 21st century, a variety of other TV shows and movies that rely on this idea of getting the audience to think they know what's going on, only to shift, right? Shift the perception. No, actually what really is going on is something different, right? This world this isn't a reality, right? You're trapped in a simulation. Or you're trapped in a dream and you don't realize it. So, we're seeing in our media, our popular culture, playing with this type of notion that there is perhaps a reality that is different than what we experience with the senses. And so we have to ask ourselves, what is true reality? Now, as Christians, of course, we have these passages in Scripture. We have this mindset, this ideology that, that's what is truly real is this spiritual realm. But again, we don't often live like that. We live in a culture that acts as if the physical world is all there is, and sometimes we fall into that trap as well. I think a perfect example of this is our thinking about death. While as a Christian, we would say death is going home, it's a transition to our eternal reward, things like that. We believe that Jesus is returning to take Christians to be with Him for eternity, right? I'm going to prepare a place for you. I'm going to come back and take you with me. But how many of us truly want that to happen right now? I mean, in many cases, we want that to happen some other time. Right? Now, certainly, if somebody's going through a protracted illness or physical trauma, they might express the desire of, I wish that this pain would end, I wish my life would end, I wish God would take me. But most people live with the, yes, I want to go to heaven, but not today. I want to live a full life and die at a ripe old age. Why? Why do we live with such an approach, such an ideology, if the spiritual world is truly what's really real? I think in many respects it's because we often see the spiritual realm as something distinct from the physical realm. And I think that in many respects, if we take a look at some passages, we see that the Bible presents something different than that.